All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are, whenever you are, however you are. I hope it's good. We are back again with another video. And today I just kind of wanted to chop it up with you guys and talk about Bitcoin for a second. So something that a lot of people will say to me whenever I first start mentioning Bitcoin is that they don't understand the concept, like why Bitcoin would be necessary or what it even does for them, for their portfolio, or just in general, right? They have no clue. So I want to take you through a quick history of how banking worked and times when Bitcoin would have really made a dramatic difference, right, in the economy, whether it was in America or abroad, and then kind of bring you into the modern era and give you a real honest take. And this is honestly my take on Bitcoin based off of studying history. Okay, so let's go back in time for a second here, right? Go back, scroll through your mind, and I want you to make your way to 17th century Britain. Okay, so 17th century, it's 1600s. You are just, a lowly kind of peasant working class individual, right? And so back in the day, right, I don't know if you've ever asked yourself what existed before banks, but if you have, then you would already know. So you know how whenever you're in classes in college and you look to your left and right and you have like the most generic NPC person ever and their name is like John Smith or James Smith or Jesse Smith, right? The most regular name, Smith. That last name means someone who works with metal. So back in the day, the goldsmiths, right, you can infer based off of the name there, would actually work with the gold, and they were technically the first banks that ever existed, right? So you were a lowly peasant, you got paid a couple of schmeckles of gold, and you realized that it was more dangerous for you to hold on to that gold yourself than it would be for you to take it somewhere that's safe and receive back a piece of paper, right? So what would happen is you would put on your little deerskin shoes and go and trudge through the mud and cobblestone streets until you got to the local goldsmith, and you would deposit your gold to them. They would put it in their vault, right? And they'd hide it in their coffers, and they would hand you in exchange a slip of paper that said, hey, if you take this slip of paper to my vault, I will exchange it for whatever the denomination of gold that is written on that slip of paper will, I'll redeem it for that much, right? So what happened is people started exchanging the paper, right? Instead of actually going and redeeming the gold and then trading it with someone, because it was just way easier. Portability, right, was one of the number one problems that existed and that still, right, exists this day. Richard Nixon said that you could only take $10,000 on a plane across the U.S. and that law is still in existence. And actually, back in the day, $10,000 back then in the 70s, whenever it was implemented, actually, interesting enough, that is the equivalent of purchasing power right now of 50,000 US dollars. So, you know what I'm saying? Portability is super important. And if something like Bitcoin or Bitcoin itself existed back then, that would have solved that problem, right? So let's keep going. So fast forward, right? All of these people start depositing their gold. They're getting these slips and they're exchanging these slips back and forth. This is the first real, like I say modern, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. Modern in the grand scheme of things, humans have been around for tens of thousands of years. Modern money, fiat, right? Fiat money, because it was backed by gold. You could go and get the gold until you couldn't. So what do I mean by this? Well, what would happen is these goldsmiths would be like, hey, I have a lot of gold just sitting in this vault here. I bet you I could come up with a way to make even more money from this, though. Like, I have a lot of power in this situation. So what would they do? Well, I'll create an example for you, and I want you to kind of follow me here because this is super important, and I don't think a lot of people realize that this still happens in the modern era, but just stay with me here. So let's say that there's a town. There's 10 people in the town. Each person in the town deposits 2 pounds of gold into the vault, right? So you got 10 pounds of gold, right? Or excuse me, 20 pounds of gold, because there's 10 people in the town. Each person has 2 pounds of gold. Boom, 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 right? 20 pounds. Goldsmith is chilling. He's like, oh, I got 20 pounds of gold. I'm loving life. Everything is great. I want to make some more money though. So let's just say that one of the people in this town is like, oh, I've got a really good idea to plow out this land over here, right? Because back in the day, especially like we're talking, 17th century on back, the majority of lending that ever happened was for what? If it wasn't for war, it was for agriculture, because agriculture was a huge part of what caused society to boom, right? Being able to go from hunter-gatherers to like agrarian society, that was one of the big pivot points that allowed for modernization to happen. So let's stay with me here, because this is a really simple example. One of the people comes up and says, hey, I got this great business idea, but I need 14 pounds of gold to be able to get the equipment and the animals and the seeds and all the good stuff that goes into tilling this enormous swath of land that I want to procure. So they say, oh, that ain't no problem. Cool. Sign on the line. Boom. 14 pounds of the gold goes to this one person. So what happens now? There's 6 pounds of gold left in the entire vault. Still 10 people in the town, 9 really, because the one guy, he's made off like a bandit. He's doing his thing, right? So in this situation, what would happen is inevitably, just because it was the 17th century does not mean that the business cycle, the booms and busts, didn't happen. And what would happen is everything was good until it wasn't. The economy started to roll over. Maybe there was war, right? Maybe the harvest wasn't that good. It could have been a multitude of reasons, but something would happen that would cause fear and panic to set in. So people would hustle their ass over to the goldsmith and they'd say, hey, give me my hey, you know why I'm here. You know exactly why I'm here. And the goldsmith would go, okay. And he'd look and he'd see, oh snap, there's more people, I see clouds of dust upon the horizon of people running fast feet towards my vault. And then what would happen is eventually the third person would come in and they would take their gold, and the fourth person would say, hey, I got my little slip here. Can I exchange it? And the goldsmith would say, well, actually, I don't have your gold. People would say, what the hell you mean you don't have my gold? I dropped it off here. You gave me the slip. Like, what do you mean? This is ridiculous. And then they would go back into town and tell all the other people that were there. And now all of a sudden there was people that were there with literal pitchforks and literal torches. And they were like, hey, we're about to set this off. No boosie, but like, we're about to set this off. Like, what's going on? And this problem actually continued to occur all the way up until the beginning of the 20th century. So let's, fast forward, come to the US. So this problem was still going on, and it still happens to this day, but we have some fail safes. So let me explain. What I just broke down to you in the simplest of terms is called fractional reserve lending or fractional reserve banking, right? So in the modern era, the reason why we don't have these same problems is because we have FDIC insurance, right? So in the event that there is a run on banks, which is when, all the people with the pitchforks came up there and everybody's running and they're like, hey, I need my money back. That's called a bank run, a run on banks, right? So when that happens in the modern era, what has been put in place is the FDIC, and they'll basically make sure that you're good up to like $100,000 in your bank account, right? If you're married, I think it's $250,000. You can learn about all this stuff also if you just really love to learn the way I learned it through taking like any kind of preparation materials for the SIE exam. All of it's written out there. It's really interesting, but I'm trying to stay, up here because I want you to stay with me. So in the US, right? Fast forward. Let's go forward 1 century, right? So the US, when it was first like really getting off the ground, in its first 100 years of inception, right? It was a lot of wildcat banking. People say, oh, it was, wildcat banks. What does that mean? Well, at one point in the US's history, there was over 30,000 different kinds of currency that existed. So imagine, right? 30,000 different kinds of currency. You're just some colonies, and you're starting to form states. You're not really all that solid just yet, but you're trying. And on top of that, of course, right, we had war, civil war happened, lots of things. And I can go into the economics of the Civil War in a different video, but what I need you to understand is not only were there over 30,000 different kinds of currency, but also the way that banks existed and the way that they worked back then was very different than how it works now. So you know how right now you can go down the street, you could probably pull out of your driveway, go down 3 streets, and once you get to the next or nearest major intersection, there's like a Chase Bank or a Bank of America or a Wells Fargo or whatever, all on the street corner. And you know that if you go to the Wells Fargo that's down the street from you, even if you went to the next state over or the next town over or wherever, and you went to another Wells Fargo, whatever amount that is reflected in your bank account at one exists at another. That did not exist. Like, that was such a foreign concept back then. It just was unfathomable. So what was happening back then is that banks had to have these things called charters. Charters were basically like, it was basically acknowledgement that, hey, you can exist, but the charter only lasted for like a year, like 18 months to 3 years. And they weren't guaranteed. So just because you got a charter 1 year didn't mean that you're going to get a charter the next, right? So there was a lot of, difficulty with building out a nation when there's just no real infrastructure to the banking system. It's a real problem, and it was profound in the U.S. Like, imagine, right? Your great uncle Jeffrey is living in Massachusetts. You're in Texas, and you get a letter by, carrier pigeon, and it says, hey, it's your uncle Jeff. I got diarrhea and scarlet fever, and I need you to get out here to Massachusetts as quickly as possible to say your goodbyes, right? So you're like, oh my God, what? You're grabbing like your little, canteen, and you're throwing everything into a big wagon, and then you have to ride down to the bank and get your little money, and you're going across the nation, right? Like, you're fighting the elements, you're fighting disease, you're fighting natives, you're fighting everything to get over to see your poor sweet dying Uncle Jeffrey. And then the worst part of it all is the money that you got might not be what they're using out there. You don't know, right? And when you come back home, the bank that you pulled your money from might not even exist anymore. So let's hope you took everything out when you left, or you had some people back home that were able to, hold it down while you were gone. Because it was a nightmare, right? So if Bitcoin existed back then, it would have solved a lot of problems for us. Number one, right? We don't have 30,000 different kinds of currency. But even if we did, 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. You're able to exchange Bitcoin no matter what the currency is. I right now could take my Bitcoin stack and go to Botswana, and whatever the native currency is that they're using over there, I will be able to exchange Bitcoin for it, and I'm good to go. It's portable, right? You don't have to worry about robbers coming in and beating you over the head with a club, and you're waking up in a puddle of your own blood, and all of your life savings and all your hard work is gone. Unless they have your seed phrase, you're good, right? So once again, Bitcoin would have really saved the day in this situation. So everything was super disjointed. People were having a really hard time. And all of this strife comes to a head in 1907. So to make a long story short, in Northern California, I want to say it was in San Francisco, there was an earthquake, and it was in one of the big financial hubs at the time. I can go into a whole video on this. I'm just trying to really keep us on track here. And it caused tens of billions of dollars in today's dollars of damage, and the financial system kind of went tits up. Everybody was freaking out. And the thing that you need to know on your financial journey, just as an aside, fear is literally, and panic is contagious just like a disease is. Like, when one person starts freaking out about something in the finance world, then other people start freaking out, and then everybody freaks out, and it becomes this huge, boiling over effect. And so the economy became so ridiculously unstable that, oh, and on top, while this is simultaneously happening, right, there's a couple of guys that try to corner the U.S. copper market that caused the stock market to collapse by like 52% in a couple of days. It's actually pandemonium. So finally, J.P. Morgan, like the OG, like the literal guy, not the company, he's the namesake of the company, but like John Pierpont Morgan and Nelson Aldrich and a handful of other super powerful financiers. Like, we're talking about, when I say super powerful financiers, I'll go into more detail on this in my next video actually, but they estimate that at this meeting, 1/4 of the entire world's wealth was sitting at the table. Okay, so like, I'm not just saying like, oh, some big New York bankers. Like, no, $1 in $4 in the entire world's wealth was sitting at this table discussing the infrastructure of the future of America's like banking system, right? So John Pierpont Morgan's like, enough. We're done with this. 1910 rolls around. He sends out like letters saying, hey, we're gonna meet at my hotel. It's in Jekyll Island, Georgia. Don't come dressed up like Mr. Peanut like you normally do. Throw the monocle away. Take off the top hat and the pea coat. We're going in duck hunting clothing. Don't use your full name. Use an alias, because if anybody finds out what's going on here, then we're in some deep trouble. So we don't want that. Let's just make it easier on ourselves, right? So they all get on the trains and they go over to Jekyll Island, Georgia, 1910. And they meet all together. It's like, I think it's probably about like 8 guys. And they all sit together and they start discussing. They say, okay, listen, our banking system has been so fragile. We keep bailing out and we're having the same problem over and over again. We need to bring some stability here. What if we created a bank, a central bank for the entire nation that's not affiliated with the U.S. government? It's just because, right, I told you, $1 in $4 in the whole world's wealth is here at this table. So like, we don't even need to be federal, but we'll call ourselves federal. And we are not a reserve either. But what we're going to do is we're going to have the right to print off money. We're going to set interest rates, and we're going to be able to keep, this whole thing going. So you say, well, Hunter, why does it matter with the interest rates? So remember the Wildcat banking I was telling you about just a minute ago? Wildcat banks, there was more than one reason why Wildcat banking was not all that good. Because imagine for a moment, if you're at your house and a mile down the road is a bank that's offering, you can get a loan from them, but it's at 8%. Down the road on the other side, you can, equal distance, you can get a loan at 2%. This is really how banking used to be in America way back when. So people would obviously hightail it as quickly as they could to get over to the 2% bank for all lending. But what happens is you take on too much risk, and then, like I said, the business cycle goes in waves. It's in waves, right? So when you go over that peak, you start cresting and you start coming down, well, they're over leveraged. The bank blows up. Everybody loses their money. And on top of losing their money, right? So we start talking about, this would be about 10 or 12. It's about, 15 years following this meeting in Jekyll Island, Georgia that I'm talking about here. This same concept was happening, right? If banks would collapse during the Great Depression, or leading into the Great Depression rather, these people would be like, hey, the bank just collapsed and like I had all my money in it. And when J.P. Morgan and friends would go and buy up these collapsed banks, if they got bought up and they thought it was worthwhile, everyone was still on the hook for all their debt. You lost all your money, right? You lost everything on the equity side of the equation, but you're still on the hook for the debt. So you can imagine, right, the kind of like turmoil and fear and why, right, panic would set in and spread the way that it does. Because unless you have access to information, earlier than everybody else, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle. So all that to say, when they have this meeting in Jekyll Island, Georgia, they said, hey, we're not going to be federal. We're not actually going to be reserving our money. We're just going to print off new money. And we're going to set interest rates, right? We're going to this is like the most basic infrastructure that I think we should propose to the U.S. government, and we'll tell them that it'll bring stability to their economy and to the banking system. And in their defense, not that I really want to defend, giant bankers, but it did, to some degree, build stability. But really, the stability was built on confidence, because if people really understood truly everything that was going on, there would have been a lot more outrage. And mind you, there were some presidents. Andrew Jackson is notorious, right? And even some of the founding fathers talking about how, the attempts at an American, like a sovereign bank, were not super, people weren't exactly super excited about it. In fact, people felt very strongly negatively about it, by and large. But nonetheless, right? So we fast forward 1913 and 1914. It's passed on Christmas Eve while everybody's gone. People think it's a big conspiracy. In reality, it had passed before then, but it just, it had essentially passed before then. But that's a long story, neither here nor there. The act passes, and we now have a central bank. So what does Bitcoin do in this situation to help us, right? Well, in this situation, Bitcoin helps us because the Federal Reserve has the ability to print money infinitely, right? They could really come out tomorrow and be like, we're going to print 15 quadrillion US dollars, and they could do it in theory, right? In actuality, they could do it. The problem is it would cause hyperinflation. So the way that the Federal Reserve sees it, even to this day, is that they price in a minimum amount of inflation every single year, right? So for you, if you're still listening, first of all, congratulations for sticking with it. You're really learning some real banking history here. If you're older than 20 years old, back when you were a kid, that there was food that was cheaper, gas was cheaper, houses were cheaper, across the board, everything was much cheaper. You've lived now long enough to be able to feel the impacts of what money printing year over year does. A lot of people say, oh yeah, they try to keep it at 2%. And by and large, they do. I will say that there's some people who are conspiracy theorists, and I may or may not have a toe in that camp, who say, honestly, if you're keeping up with the S&P, that's roughly inflation, right? You're beating it out by a hair, a margin, right? So in reality, that takes us from 2% to something closer to let's say 4 to 6%, right? The market moves 8-10%. You're getting a little bit better, a little bit richer each year, give and take. This programmed inflation, though, is essentially what they're saying when they are programming 2% inflation. They're trying to keep that target, is that your dollar's value is losing 2%. 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%. Like I said earlier with Richard Nixon and the $10,000 back then, how it had $50K in purchasing power. We can't transport $50K now. The purchasing power has degraded. It's eroded so much from the US dollar that now people don't have the same ability, the same, purchasing power. You know what I'm saying? They don't have that same purchasing power today that they used to have. So what Bitcoin does to fix this is, because Bitcoin has a fixed supply, meaning there will never be more coins. When it was first created, that was the maximum amount of coins that were ever going to exist. And obviously they were still being mined away, or I should say mined into the circulation, right? But regardless, at its inception, that was the total amount of Bitcoin that will ever exist. Whereas in US dollars, we're still printing off fresh dollars. What is it? $24 billion worth of dollars every single day, right? So literally the dollar is losing value day over day. When you convert your dollars into Bitcoin, what you are basically doing is freezing your purchasing power at today's value. So imagine, right, when people are saying, well, Bitcoin's going to be worth, $1 million or 10 million or 100 million a coin, the reason why that mathematically works is Bitcoin is a liquidity sponge. So it's going to take that money out of circulation and it's going to lock it up. And remember, the supply is finite. So in economics, if you've taken, Econ 101, you should know if there's a limited or scarce amount of something, but there's infinite dollars chasing it, the price is going to shoot up until it eventually finds a place where people are willing to give up that scarce finite resource, right? So that is what creates these massive price jumps, these leaps and bounds, where you see an asset go from being worth, $16,000 a few years ago to being worth, 1/4 of the price of the average American home. This is only going to continue, right? So when you are going in and you're purchasing Bitcoin, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, listen, I'm going to take these infinite dollars that they're going to just continue. They click a couple buttons on a computer and there's billions of more dollars, right? These dollars are not super valuable. So they're going and they're saying, hey, we're going to print off these dollars. You're saying, I'm going to take my little piece and I'm going to put it into something that's scarce and finite, because by the time that you realize that these dollars aren't worth anything, now you're coming to the table and you're asking me for something, right? You're coming to the table and I am now in the position of power. This is the single, I wish people could understand that this single concept can make them, I'm not saying that, you putting in $100 every 6 months is going to make you financially free. I mean, eventually, if with enough time, yeah, right? Hundreds of years, but it won't be you that's free. It's going to be your great grandkids, right? But what I am saying is the more money that you're able to put into Bitcoin, despite the volatility, because people always get shook out and scared of volatility, this should be money that you don't plan to touch for 10, 20, 40 years. This is, for me, it's my retirement. It's all of my savings is locked in there. It's been locked in there now. We're coming up on we're getting on closer to a year. Yeah. So what I need you to understand is that it's a liquidity sponge. There's only so many houses in the Hamptons that rich people are going to be able to buy. There's only so many Lambos, so many Rolexes, so many shares of a company, so much, so many bonds, so much real estate, so much land, so many businesses that they want to run. Eventually, people will say, why not just park my money into, number one, it's super liquid, right? You can access it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you can make an exchange with somebody. People say, well, I can't do that with a bank. Precisely. It's super portable. If you've got your seed phrase, you can go anywhere around the world. You got it on a steel plate, you can go anywhere in the world. And as long as you remember or have that seed phrase, you're good to go, right? It can't be printed into infinity and lose its value. People think that taxes are the only ways that you lose wealth, but in reality, every time that they turn that money printer on, you're becoming less wealthy than you were before, right? People say, well, everything is so expensive and I just can't, I can't afford a house. I can't afford all these things. The thing is, nothing is becoming more expensive. There's just more dollars chasing after it. So inflation is hitting, right? If there's a house, right, and that house is 2,000 square feet, normal house, regular middle-class neighborhood, and there's 3 people that want to purchase that house, right? 3 people want to buy it. And those 3 people say, hey, I can offer up this much money for it, right? Everything looks good. Okay, well, yeah, I guess I could sell this house off, but what happens then if they print off more money, and now everybody has double what they had before, right? What happens? Did the house get more expensive? Did the house become more valuable? Did something change fundamentally in the underlying asset? No. What changed is that there's now more money in circulation. So people are going to try to just outbid. They have more money to be able to put up. And mostly this is happening for the investor class, right? Because wages have been pretty much stagnant since the 70s. But it's the same concept, right? There's more money from institutions that are chasing the same assets. Eventually, what are you going to do, right? It just becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger job. Whereas if you just locked your money away in a scarce asset that, you don't have to fix toilets at 2 a.m. or call somebody to do it. You don't have to deal with annoying people on the other side of a phone. You don't have to deal with, oh my God, you don't have to deal with a contractor that will show up one day and not the next. And, it's just, there's so many fewer headaches involved, right? So Bitcoin does a phenomenal job of taking, your purchasing power and taking the best parts of the 21st century's technology and applying it to the global banking system, right? It takes all of the good parts of today and applies it to anybody, anywhere, at any time. And for what does this mean for you, right? You're saying, okay, well, Hunter, you're telling me all this history. What does this mean for someone like me? What it means is, if you have the ability to, and even if you don't, find a way to make extra money or park your extra money that you're not going to touch for decades from now, park it into Bitcoin and you become a part of the ownership class. I will continue to say this over and over and over and over again until you guys can repeat it without me even having to say it. When you join the ownership class, you start making your way closer and closer to the elite. And I don't mean this in a derogatory term or like in an incendiary way. I'm not saying that you become like, people always associate, oh, I'm a part of the elite, like, is that evil? No, not at all. Actually, it's quite the opposite, right? Because now you have the resources to be the change in this world that you always wanted to be. The change that you've, desperately, like, these people are idiots. If I had the resources, I would do this, and it would make the change, a difference in so many people's life, or maybe just a difference in one person's life. It doesn't matter. You can bend the world the way that you want it when you have the resources to do so. And through purchasing Bitcoin as frequently and with as much purchasing power as you can afford to every single time, and even when you can't, and you just say, I'm going to go hustle a little bit extra, get a little extra bread, and park it into Bitcoin. It makes a dramatic difference. You show up for the number go up because you're like, oh, I love seeing it. My $10,000 turn into $50K. That's so good. But then you start realizing, I'm holding on to something that's super valuable. This is a revolutionary technology. And I'm early. I think I read somewhere earlier this week that Bitcoin is only at like 3% adoption or something like that, 2-3% adoption. If you're listening to this right now, have the opportunity to be a legend and to do something so legendary for your bloodline. I genuinely cannot stress enough to you. It's as simple these days as opening up your brokerage, your Robinhood, right? Your Coinbase, your Strike, whatever, wherever you want it to, River, I don't care where you purchase it. Just go in, deposit your cash, convert it to Bitcoin, and then when you start doing the knowledge and you learn about why you want to get it off of exchanges, you'll get yourself cold storage. You'll put your Bitcoin in cold storage and you'll sit back. Because once this adoption starts, even at 50% adoption, y'all, you're going to be at a point where, money is not a big deal, especially if you're consistently throwing your savings in and you're delaying that gratification, right? I just talked to you guys in my last video about how Bitcoin is deflationary instead of inflationary, right? The US dollar, we just talked about how inflation hits the US dollar. It's the exact opposite when you have a scarce, finite resource, right? Now, the price of everything starts to drop. You talk about like houses, the price of a house. At one point, it would take, 200,000 Bitcoin to purchase a house. The median house, or just the average house in the US, right? Hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin to purchase it. We're at a point now where if you got like literally a handful, 5 Bitcoin, you could purchase the house in full and have $100,000 worth of upgrades and still have some money left over, right? So I'm trying to get you to understand that this is a critical point. You have the potential to make a quantum jump, an asymmetric bet with your financial future through doing something as simple as just parking a little bit of extra money, your savings, right? Your savings in there. There's people who will disagree with me and say like, oh, you should go Bitcoin only. And yeah, like there's nothing wrong with going 100% all in Bitcoin. You don't want to learn anything else about finance. You just want to sit, let it cook, and do nothing. Piece of cake, then do it. But put your savings in there, and then your money that you're willing to speculate, make the money, pay the tax, and then park it into Bitcoin. You've doubled your dose, right? So what I'm really here to get you to understand, and what I really hope that you're able to take away, is that not all money is created equal. And you have to be able to discern between what's fake and what's real, okay? And Bitcoin is as real as it gets. And what you own in Bitcoin, when you convert that to cold storage, that is yours. That is your slice of the pie. There's only 21 million coins out there in existence. And really, it's closer to like 18 because there's wallets that have been lost and people, you know, lose their money in boating accidents and all kinds of stuff. So your little sliver of that, it's you being able to own something of value. Do you understand what I'm saying? You can't purchase a whole house right now, right? Maybe you're making 50K, 60K a year. After, you know, all of your necessary life expenses, your discretionary income, we talked about that, right? When you get down to it, maybe you can only put $400 a month into something, into Bitcoin, into savings, right? Bitcoin is your savings. That $400 a month is going to compound. It is going to buy you less and less Bitcoin over time. But what's going to happen is those dollars that you're putting up today are going to be worth more and more and more. It's going to have a more potent purchasing power today than it will in the future, because that's the way the dollar's programmed. That's the big surprise. It's a big secret. Bitcoin is going to increase in value, bare minimum, right? I genuinely, in my heart of hearts, know you could hook me up to a lie detector right now. $1 million coin, we will live to see it. If you're my age, I'm 28. We'll live to see it sooner than you expect. But this is the way that the game works. When you start learning about how money works, the dollars are going to flow into Bitcoin. It's a liquidity sponge. It's going to draw those dollars in. The price is going to continue up. Why? Not because of any other reason than the fact that the supply is fixed. Those dollars, once they start grabbing up those coins, I'm sorry, if you're late to the party, you're late to the party. You're like that dude who ran over there and couldn't get his gold out of the gold vault, right? In the 17th century, because you're late to the party. Success loves speed, and you got to be fast with it. You got to be quick with it, right? Right now, currently, there is not enough Bitcoin in existence for every millionaire in America to own a full coin. So you tell me, when millionaires start realizing, oh wait, this is actually something that, like, I could have got a great return on this, do you not think that they're going to come knock on your door and ask you, hey, what price? Well, you got a quarter coin over there. How much would you give me for a quarter coin? How much would you give me for your little, maybe you picked up 2 coins during the bear market that happened a couple years ago. I'm jealous, right? Maybe you picked up, I don't know, a tenth of a coin. Like, they're going to come asking. And now you've put the ball into your court. You have leverage. You have bargaining power. The people throughout history, the people who have the bargaining power have a tendency to come out not fully unscathed all the time, but with much less damage than the people that were at the bottom, right? The U.S. has a tendency to socialize losses amongst the little guys and to simply socialize the gains to the big dogs, how few of them are scattered around, right? So all that to say, I don't want to yammer for 10 hours about this topic, but I certainly could. Get yourself off zero. Like, go, I don't know, if you do dog grooming, or you cut lawns, or you cut hair, or you make clothes, or you have interesting thoughts, find a way, okay, to get yourself some Bitcoin, because I don't want to see you get left behind because of ignorance, right? You didn't know what was going on. Now that you've been exposed, you can't say you never knew. Tomorrow marks the beginning of the most bullish part of the year, or the bullish part of the cycle seasonally for Bitcoin. I hope that you didn't miss out. I hope that you've been listening. If you've been joining me for all of the Buy Your First Bitcoin events, then congratulations. It's about to get real nice. Your portfolio is going to be popping, and I'm excited for you. But if you haven't, come join us. Give me a comment down below. I'll make sure that I kick you a link so that way you don't miss out. And if you're in Dallas, I'll make sure that I get you the link so you can actually join us in person. But y'all, it's been real. It's been fun. I'm still stacking sats, doing everything that I can, and I hope and pray. Sorry, windows open upstairs. I hope and I pray that you are doing the same, because we are about to change the trajectory of our bloodlines, and it all starts here. So with that, I leave you. I wish you the absolute best, and until next time, Wealth Hunter out. Peace.